Hi everybody, welcome back. Today we are doing our delivery lecture. It's based on the book Talk Like TED by Carmine Gallo. Carmine Gallo is a professional speech coach who's worked with a lot of people, most notably Steve Jobs. Now his book Talk Like TED goes through and analyzes hundreds of TED Talks, categorizes them based on different things, and gives us a very interesting look at some of the things that professional speakers do, particularly at TED. Now we're using this book particularly today to highlight some of the delivery things that we can do in our introductory public speaking course. And number one, according to Carmine Gallo, is that we should be learning how to master the art of storytelling. This idea comes from the fact that there's something deep-seated in the way human beings communicate through the use of narrative or storytelling. If you think back prior to the invention of the printing press, the only way that we really shared information was through what we call the oral tradition, or by talking to each other, and a lot of that came through storytelling. So Carmine Gallo says that step one into becoming a really proficient professional public speaker is to understand that it's okay and it's good to tell stories, and that we should get really good at it. The better we are at it, the better we will be at sharing ideas in a way that makes it fun and easy for our audience to listen and remember what we had to say. Now, part of that, according to Gallo, is that we need to get comfortable with the use of rhetorical or Aristotelian appeals. Primarily that there's power in pathos or pathos, and that is there's power in the ability to appeal to our audience's emotion. To highlight this, Gallo analyzes Bryan Stevenson's TED Talk about injustices in the criminal justice system in this country, and breaks that speech down to 65% appeals to pathos or appeals to emotion, 25% logos, or appeals to logic and reasoning, and 10% ethos, or appeals to credibility, not ethics. Now, oftentimes people will get ethos confused with ethics, but it's actually credibility. And that has to do with the fact that if you are not perceived as an ethical person, you will have, or as an ethical speaker, you'll have less credibility. So ethos is credibility, but it is directly linked with ethics. And there's two different types of credibility we want to be aware of. There's extrinsic credibility, which comes from outside of us. These are our titles, the way that we dress, where we're presenting. And then there's intrinsic credibility that comes from within us. And this is how we are perceived. How do we sound? How do we look? Do we look confident and comfortable? Do we sound confident and comfortable? Those boost our credibility. And the intrinsic part is really what we're going to be talking about today. Now, one interesting fact that Gallo brings up in this section of the book is that PowerPoints are often overused. And in fact, in Bryan Stevenson's TED Talk, which Gallo chose to talk about because it has the record for the longest standing ovation in TED history, Stevenson didn't use any visuals at all. There was no PowerPoint, there was no Prezi, there was nothing. It was just him standing up there with his body and his voice. And he created this presentation that moved people to stand up and clap for nearly 2 minutes. So why do we think that we have to have PowerPoint all the time or some visual? Well, part of that is because we're visually stimulated all the time. But research actually shows that PowerPoints engage our the language processing portion of our brain, which is good. We want our audience to be thinking about what we said. But research also shows that by telling a story, by telling a good story, we can activate the areas that process language, vision, senses, and motor functions. So by telling a story, we're getting to the same part of the brain, that language processing portion, but also so much more when we think about our vision, senses, and motor functions. But Gallo goes a little bit farther, and instead of just saying, look, we need to get comfortable and confident telling stories and using the rhetorical appeals, and we need to lean less on PowerPoint and visuals, Gallo breaks these different types of stories down. He said, not only should we get good at these stories, but we need to understand what types of stories we are telling. So first and foremost, we have personal stories. These are stories told from the first person. They're our stories. They are the ones that are going to be best told because we experience them. We can infuse those with energy and a genuine perspective that we might not get from other stories, like stories that come from somebody else or stories using they. These are not our stories, so they're not going to be as accurate, and they're not going to be told with the same energy a lot of the time. But one thing I want you all to be aware of is the fact that you should be asking people if you can use their stories in your presentations before you actually do it. You don't want to tell somebody's story and then have them mad at you for telling that story. And last but not least, at TED, we see a lot of stories about money or brand success, which again, makes a lot of sense. But it's interesting because those stories are about making money as opposed to, look at this graph and this chart and these statistics at how much money we made. They're telling stories about how to make money and how to go about doing that, how to share those ideas. So again, stories can be used to tell a number of different things, to make a number of different points, and you can use personal stories, other people's stories, or stories about brand success. Now, if we are reading this book, we have understood that we need to get comfortable telling a story. And it's okay to do that, and there's different ways to do that, and we see that at TED. But the next thing that Gallo says we need to do is get comfortable having a conversation, which oftentimes seems a little silly because we communicate all the time. We have been communicating most of our lives, if not all of our lives. But Gallo says that we need to practice relentlessly and internalize our content so that we can deliver the presentation as comfortably as having a conversation with a close friend. So if you think about that, Gallo is saying here that we should be practicing our speeches to the point that we can give them like we are having a conversation with a close friend. It's not that we need to practice and become very robotic and rigid in the way that we're presenting. It's that we need to practice in a way that makes it natural and comfortable and seem genuine. If you think about, say, if you've ever taken a dance class or seen a competitive dance or seen a professional dancer, you can see that those movements are smooth and they're natural. But how we learn to dance is often very unnatural. We learn individual steps, and through time we put them together and they start out awkward and unnatural and clunky. But through practice, all of a sudden we end up with this final result that is smooth and natural and beautiful. Public speaking is the same thing. So really, practice plays a very, very big role in what we're doing. But also when we're practicing, Gallo gives us some tips that will help us. The first step is to get help with planning. Ask the people around you, does this seem like a good idea? Would you like to listen to this? What do you think of this? What do you think if I put this point here and that point there? What do you think about my presentation overall? And then you want to get early feedback. So again, as you're working through your presentation, don't wait until the end to ask somebody for feedback. Ask early. Hey, this is going to be my introduction. What do you think of this? This is my first main point. What do you think of this? When you get help with planning and you get early feedback, you can not only hear your ideas for yourself, but somebody else can hear your ideas. And that solves a big problem that we have in academics, where oftentimes our ideas don't get evaluated by somebody else until it's time to be graded. And that's our essays, our presentations, that's everything. When really, we want to make sure that we're getting good feedback early and often, and the people around you can provide that without having to sit down with a rubric. And last but not least, Gallo says that we need to rehearse, and rehearse. Again, internalize that idea of practicing until you can have a conversation with your audience that comes across like you're having a conversation with a close friend. Gallo goes a little bit farther and gives us these 3 P's. Number 1 is passion. This relates to our topic selection. So pick something that you're passionate about. It'll help with your vocal and nonverbal delivery. We will not only hear your energy and your genuine desire to talk about that topic, but we'll be able to see it because your body language will be different. Then practice. Practice, get help with your early planning, get your good early feedback, and practice. And last but not least, be aware of your presence. Now, being aware of the presence takes a little bit of work. And to really highlight that, we're going to talk about vocal and nonverbal delivery, or body language. So with vocal delivery, we're going to talk about 4 different things. Number 1 is rate. This is the speed at which we're speaking. Our standard conversational rate is about 90 to 100 words per minute. But fun fact, the human brain can process between 500 and 600 words per minute of spoken language. It's incredibly fast, and it's inaudible to anybody with an untrained ear. But as a speaker, you want to get comfortable varying your rate of speech. You want to slow down at parts that you want to really sink in. You want to speed up when you want to get your audience engaged. As a teacher, I can see when I start to speak faster, my students will lean forward. They'll start taking more notes. They close the space between us just by leaning forward in their desk. This shows me that they're focusing. They're getting more engaged with what I'm talking about. And then I'll slow down and then speed back up. And through this variance, where you're varying your vocal rate, you can impact and directly cause your audience to focus more. Number 2 is volume. This makes a lot of sense, right? Your audience has to hear you. If your audience can't hear you, they won't listen. Or if they have to struggle to hear you, they won't listen. So make sure that you're using a voice, a volume that is appropriate to the setting that you're speaking in. You don't want to shout at your audience, but you got to make sure that they can hear you. So if you naturally have a little bit of a lower voice or you're more soft-spoken, you have to practice projecting your voice, and you'll feel it. It'll sound different than when you're having a conversation. You'll feel it in your vocal cords. You'll feel it in your abdomen. You'll feel it in your chest. It sounds different and it feels different. Part of that importance of practicing varying our voice and our volume and feeling it in our vocal cords and our chest has to do with our pitch as well. So oftentimes when we're talking, we're just talking naturally, but we are able to locate our voice and make it higher and more nasally, or lower and drop it down into our chest. And if you've ever heard somebody say that common saying of speak from your chest, this is what they're talking about. Research actually supports the fact that when we speak from our chest, when we pull our shoulders back and we create more space in our chest and in our rib cage, you can feel your voice vibrating through your chest if you put your hand right here. This has been shown to increase our perception and make us seem more credible and more authoritative. And this is a small trick that anybody can do. You can drop your voice and you can sound more credible and more powerful. It just takes a little bit of practice. And lastly, we have pauses. So pauses are a very tricky one because oftentimes we don't like to stop talking. We don't want to give our audience a moment to think about what we've been talking about, especially when we're thinking about using the rate at which we're speaking a little bit faster and faster and faster. Well, if you talk too fast for too long, your audience will stop listening because it's too taxing. So you want to add in some pauses. One of the first people to do this was Winston Churchill. And Winston Churchill used to add in pauses to his speeches just because. It wasn't necessarily at a point where it was something profound that he had said. He would just pause because he knew during that time his audience would clap and cheer and they would get excited and start to build energy among themselves. Well, as their energy is building and they're clapping and cheering, Winston Churchill would also get more engaged and more energetic. We'd have this positive feedback loop where the speaker's getting more energized, the audience is getting more energized. Now, obviously, with your academic and professional speeches, that's not going to be the case. But adding in a pause every once in a while is a really good idea. And if you're not comfortable just stopping to say, think about what you want to say, you can bring a cup or bring a drink with you and just take a small drink of water. It'll help you talk. It'll help you contextualize what you want to say, but it also gives your audience just a brief moment to think about what you had just said. But it's not just vocal delivery that we can adjust to make us seem more powerful and authoritative. We can also alter our bodies, and we can use our body movements in a number of different ways. We'll spend a good amount of time talking about this later when we talk about nonverbal communication and particularly power posing. But some of the things, right now we're going to talk about some of the things that we want to avoid. So these are body movement solutions. So we want to avoid being fidgety. Now, some of the most common things that I see from students in a face-to-face setting, the students doing all sorts of things, leaning, walking backwards and forwards from the podium, kicking their legs. But in Zoom, the most common thing I see is this, swaying side to side. Now, it might seem a little bit silly, but if I were doing this while I'm lecturing or while I'm listening to what you're saying, you'd probably think that I look like I'm not very engaged. This is something that, at least for me, I think of, when I see it, I think of a bored child sitting outside of, say, the doctor's office, just moving, so uncomfortable, moving. What we want to do is move less. And when we do move, we want to move with a purpose. So I'm not telling you to stop moving altogether. I'm just saying work on moving in a way that promotes your credibility. Don't do short, choppy movements. Avoid wiping your face often or touching your mouth because that inhibits our ability to hear you. Another big one, especially on Zoom, is avoid touching your neck. This is a major low power move, and it shows that you're super uncomfortable. So practice either sitting or standing wherever you're going to be presenting, and practice getting comfortable in that environment. And then just sit still and move naturally like you might if you're having a conversation with a close friend. But it's not just about our body. We want to be aware of our hands and our gestures. So when you're standing up in front of an audience, you want to avoid putting your hand in your pockets. You'll see this with Bryan Stevenson's speech when we watch it. He puts a hand in his pocket for just a brief moment and then takes it out and starts using his gestures again. You want to keep your hands out of your pockets, whether it's a sweatshirt, pants pocket, whatever, for a number of reasons. Number one is that when you have your hands in your pockets, you can't use your gestures, and that's damaging to our presentation. But number two is that it's often perceived as that we're nonchalant or we're apathetic about what we're talking about, and it takes away from our ethos or our credibility. So when it comes to gestures, we want to do a couple of things. And number one is we want to use our gestures. Avoid holding on to something that's going to limit your use of gestures. Make sure your hands are out of your pockets and use your hands. That movement does two things. Number one, research shows that our brains are more engaged. So people who use more gestures are more engaged to their own ideas, but also audiences perceive them as being more confident, more credible. So we definitely want that. So make sure you're using your gestures. But number two is that you want to stay within the power sphere. So it's this range between your nose and your belly button. It's right here where you can do pretty much whatever you want as long as you're moving your hands. And that movement is going to draw your audience's attention. So whether you are on Zoom or you're in front of a live audience, you want to move your gestures and keep them in this confined space because that movement will draw your audience's eye and help keep them engaged. And it'll also boost how you're perceived. It'll increase your credibility and your authority. Now, yes, you can have movements and gestures outside of the power sphere, but those are riskier. What you want to do, especially if you want to have a good, solid, safe presentation that you know is going to be strong, keep everything in the power sphere. You'll see lots of speakers and politicians do this. They often have their hands crossed on a podium and they'll do this, or with one hand, they reach out, right? And they're reaching out to the audience. Those are really, really effective uses of gestures. So to conclude this lecture, we've talked about delivery, but primarily we talked about learning how to tell a story and getting comfortable doing so. That narrative is very important to the way human beings have been communicating since the beginning of time. We want to get comfortable using our rhetorical appeals, so appeals to emotion or pathos, appeals to logic and reasoning or logos, and our credibility or ethos. We talked about practicing until we are perceived as being comfortable and confident like we would be if we were having a conversation with a close friend. And then we talked about specific delivery details related to presence. So this is vocal and nonverbal delivery. We talked about rate, volume, pitch, and pauses. And then we talked about some of our body movement solutions and gestures. So I encourage you before your next speech, your next presentation, whatever it might be, practice and practice with a purpose. Be aware of your surroundings. Be aware of how you look with your body language. How do you sound? And one of the upsides to presenting in this digital atmosphere is that you can record yourself and then watch again. And I highly recommend that you do that, and you will have a much stronger presentation when you're done and once you can see how you look and sound. Take care, everybody.